My husband was cheating with the PTA president, so I volunteered to expose them. I never thought I'd become the woman who spies on her husband. I used to judge those women, the ones who checked phone records and followed their partners to parking lots. I thought they were paranoid, insecure, desperate. I thought they just didn't trust enough. Then I became one of them. It didn't start with suspicion. It started with a misplaced receipt, a crumpled piece of paper I found in his jacket pocket while I was doing laundry. A receipt for a hotel I'd never heard of, on a date when he'd told me he was working late. That receipt was like a loose thread. I pulled it and the whole sweater unraveled. Suddenly, everything made sense. The late meetings, the secretive phone calls, the way he'd started dressing better and smelling different. And then I discovered who it was. Not a stranger. Not someone from his office. Someone I saw every week at school pickup, the PTA president. I remember the exact moment everything changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, and I was sorting laundry in our basement. The fluorescent light was buzzing, the way it always did, and I had a podcast playing in my earbuds. It was mundane, routine, the kind of domestic chore I'd done 1,000 times without thinking. Then I reached into the pocket of his navy blazer and felt paper. I pulled it out, expecting a receipt from a coffee shop or a gas station. Instead, it was a folded piece of hotel stationery, the kind you find on the nightstand in upscale rooms. The name of the hotel was embossed at the top in gold lettering. It was a place downtown, expensive, romantic. The date was 2 weeks ago. He'd told me he was working late that night. I'd made him dinner and put it in the fridge thinking he'd heat it up when he got home. He never mentioned a hotel. My hands started trembling. I unfolded the paper further. There was handwriting on it. A woman's handwriting, elegant and looping. It said, "Thank you for last night. I can't stop thinking about you. See you at the meeting tomorrow, XOXO." No name. Just the kiss and a single initial, A. My brain scrambled for explanations. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the jacket wasn't his. Maybe a colleague had borrowed it. Maybe it was an old receipt from a business trip. But the date was wrong. The location was wrong. Everything was wrong. I stood there in the basement holding that piece of paper, and I felt my entire world tilt on its axis. I didn't confront him that night. I couldn't. I needed to know more. I needed to be sure before I blew up our marriage on a suspicion, because once I said the words out loud, there was no taking them back. So I started paying attention. I noticed things I'd been ignoring for months. The way he'd started working out more often, buying new clothes, getting haircuts more frequently. The way he'd become distant, irritable, quick to snap at the kids. The way he'd stopped looking at me during conversations, his eyes always drifting to his phone. I noticed the smell. A different perfume, floral and sweet, clinging to his shirts when they came back from the dry cleaner. I noticed the late nights. The sudden emergencies at work. The weekends he spent networking with colleagues I'd never met. And then I noticed her. Her name was Annalise. She was the PTA president at our children's elementary school. She was polished, elegant, always dressed in expensive clothes and perfectly applied makeup. She had a smile that made other moms feel inadequate. She organized every school event with military precision, and she did it all while volunteering at the food bank and running a successful real estate business. She was the kind of woman who made you feel like you were failing at life just by existing in her vicinity. I'd never liked her. I always thought it was because she was too perfect. Too put together, too smug. Now I realized it was something else. I'd sensed something wrong. I just hadn't known what it was. I started watching them at school functions. The way she'd touch his arm when she laughed. The way he'd lean in when she spoke. The way their eyes would meet across a room. A silent conversation passing between them. It was subtle. Anyone else would have missed it, but I wasn't anyone else. I was the woman holding a hotel receipt in her basement. I needed proof. Concrete, undeniable proof. Not just suspicions and glances, so I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through his phone. It was late at night. He was asleep beside me, his breathing slow and even. I reached over and picked up his phone from the nightstand. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I knew his passcode. It was our anniversary. I'd set it myself years ago. I unlocked the phone and went straight to his messages. There it was. A thread with a contact saved as A, no last name, just the initial. And when I opened it, my heart stopped. The messages went back months. They were explicit, intimate, full of details I never wanted to know. They talked about their meetings, their plans, their feelings. They talked about me. He called me cold, unavailable, like a roommate. She told him she was finally with someone who understood her. They were planning a future together. I read everything, every single message. I couldn't stop. It was like picking at a scab, knowing it would hurt but unable to stop myself. When I was done, I put the phone back. I lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I'd been hollowed out. The man beside me was a stranger. The life I'd built was a lie. The future I'd envisioned was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there listening to him breathe, and I planned, because I wasn't going to be the victim. I wasn't going to cry and scream and beg him to choose me. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. I was going to expose them, both of them, and I was going to do it in a way they'd never see coming. But first, I needed more evidence. Hard evidence. Evidence that would destroy them completely. So the next morning, I walked into the school office and volunteered to handle the PTA finances for the end-of-year carnival. They were thrilled. Annalise was especially grateful. She hugged me, her perfume filling my nostrils, and said, "Thank you so much. much. You're a lifesaver. I smiled and said, happy to help. She had no idea what was coming. Taking over the PTA finances was easier than I expected. Annalise was so eager to offload the work that she handed me the bank statements, the expense reports, and the checkbook without a second thought. She probably thought I was just another bored housewife looking for something to fill my time. She had no idea I was looking for something else entirely. I started at home, alone, late at night while my husband snored in our bedroom. The kitchen table was covered in papers, spreadsheets, receipts, bank statements stretching back nearly 2 years. I methodically entered every transaction into a digital ledger, cross-referencing dates and amounts. It was tedious work, but I didn't mind. I'd spent years doing forensic accounting for large corporations, following paper trails to catch embezzlers and fraudsters. This was no different, except this time it was personal. Within a week, I found the first discrepancy. There was an expense labeled carnival decorations for $200. The date was suspicious. It had been approved 3 weeks after the actual carnival had ended. I pulled the corresponding receipt and found it was from a high-end boutique, not a party supply store. A boutique that sold expensive clothing and accessories. The receipt showed 2 items purchased on the same day, a designer handbag and a silk scarf. The total matched the expense claim exactly. I zoomed in on the signature at the bottom of the approval form. It was Annalise's. I didn't jump to conclusions. I needed more. I continued digging. There were other discrepancies. A $500 expense for catering that had been approved on a date when there was no school event. A $300 line item for printing services that turned out to be a gift card to a fancy restaurant. A $750 expense for arts and crafts supplies that matched the date of an expensive hotel stay near the same location. Annalise had been embezzling from the PTA for over a year. The amounts were small at first, easily overlooked, but they'd grown larger over time. She'd been using the funds to pay for romantic dinners, weekend getaways, and expensive gifts. Gifts for my husband. Gifts she'd charged to the school's account, and my husband had been helping her. I found evidence of his involvement in a separate set of documents. He'd been listed as a consultant on several vendor contracts, paid hundreds of dollars for services that had never been provided. He'd signed invoices for work that didn't exist, approved payments to shell companies, and funneled money back to Annalise. He was complicit. He wasn't just sleeping with her. He was stealing from our children's school with her. I felt sick, but I also felt something else. A cold, sharp clarity. They weren't just betraying me. They were betraying the entire community. Every parent who donated money for school supplies, every teacher who'd relied on PTA funding for classroom resources, every child who'd missed out on better programs because their funds were being siphoned away. Annalise and my husband had been robbing them blind, and I was going to make sure everyone knew. I gathered my evidence. I organized it meticulously, creating a detailed presentation that laid out every transaction, every discrepancy, every lie. I included screenshots of messages I'd found on my husband's phone, proof of their affair and their plot to leave me for each other. I created a timeline that connected the dots between their romantic rendezvous and the PTA expenses. It was damning. It was undeniable, but I didn't act yet. I waited. I attended PTA meetings with a smile on my face. I congratulated Annalise on her brilliant planning. I brought homemade cookies to meetings and laughed at her jokes. I watched her hug my husband in the parking lot when she thought no one was looking. I played the part of the clueless wife, the helpful volunteer, the doormat. And while I waited, I planned my delivery. The carnival was the perfect opportunity. It would be packed with parents, teachers, and community members. I'd have an audience. I'd have the perfect setting to reveal everything. I prepared a brief speech. Simple, direct, no drama, no hysterics, just the facts. I practiced it in front of my bathroom mirror, watching my own reflection as I calmly recited the evidence. The night before the carnival, I received a text message from Annalise. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Thanks again for all your help with the finances. You're a lifesaver. I responded with a smiley face. She had no idea. The morning of the carnival dawned bright and clear. I dressed carefully, not in something flashy or dramatic. I wore a simple sundress and comfortable sandals. I wanted to look approachable, trustworthy, the kind of woman you'd never suspect of being a threat. I arrived early. I checked in with the volunteers, helped set up the booths, and made sure everything was in order. Annalise was buzzing around, her usual polished self, directing traffic with her megaphone and her radiant smile. My husband was there too, helping at the dunk tank. He waved at me from across the field. I waved back. He had no idea what I was about to do. At noon, Annalise called for everyone's attention. She wanted to give a brief thank you speech before the games began. She stood on the small stage near the main entrance, her megaphone in hand, and began to address the crowd. I waited until she was halfway through her speech. Then I walked to the stage. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. "I'd like to say something." Annalise turned to me, her smile faltering slightly. "Oh, of course. We'd love to hear from our amazing volunteer." She handed me the megaphone. I took it. I looked out at the crowd, parents, teachers, students, all looking at me with expectant smiles. I took a deep breath. "Thank you all for being here today." I began. "This carnival wouldn't be possible without your generosity. Your donations, your time, your support. It all goes toward making our children's education better." I paused. "Let the word settle." "Except when it doesn't," the crowd murmured, confused. Annalise's smile had frozen on her face. My husband was walking toward the stage, his expression wary. "I've been reviewing the PTA finances for the past few months," I continued, "and I've discovered something troubling. Over $15,000 has been stolen from our school's accounts. misappropriated, used for personal expenses that have nothing to do with our children. I pulled a folder from my bag. I have the receipts, the bank statements, the proof. And it all points to two people. I looked at Annalise, then at my husband. Annalise, the PTA president, I said. And my husband. The crowd erupted. Chaos erupted. Parents were shouting. Teachers were exchanging horrified glances. Annalise's megaphone slipped from her fingers and clattered to the ground. My husband was pushing through the crowd toward the stage, his face contorted with rage and panic. "Give me that," he hissed, reaching for the folder. "You're making a scene. We need to talk about this privately." I held the folder against my chest. "No, we're going to talk about it now." In front of everyone, he grabbed for it. I stepped back again, almost falling off the edge of the stage. A father in the front row jumped up and blocked my husband's path. "Back off, man," he said. "Let her speak." My husband looked around, realizing for the first time that he was surrounded by angry parents, people who'd trusted him, people who'd welcomed him into their homes, people whose children played with his children. He was trapped. I opened the folder. I have bank statements showing Annalise approved payments to shell companies. I have receipts for designer handbags, expensive dinners, and hotel rooms charged to the PTA account. I have invoices signed by my husband for services that were never provided, and I have messages between the two of them discussing their affair and their plan to run away together. I held up a stack of papers. It's all here. Every transaction, every lie, every bit of evidence. I've sent copies to the school board, the district superintendent, and the local police. Annalise finally found her voice. "You can't prove any of this," she said, but her voice was shaky, unconvincing. "This is slander. I'll sue you." "I have timestamps," I said calmly. "I have signatures. I have bank records. I have everything. And I'm not the only one who's been looking into this. I've been in touch with a forensic accountant who specializes in school embezzlement cases. She reviewed my findings and confirmed everything. She's prepared to testify." Annalise's face went white. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. My husband was trying to push past the men blocking his path. "You're destroying our family," he shouted at me. "Think about the kids. Think about what this will do to them." I felt a flash of anger so hot it almost made me dizzy. "You should have thought about the kids," I said, my voice rising for the first time. "You should have thought about them when you were stealing from their school. You should have thought about them when you were sleeping with another woman. You should have thought about them when you were planning to leave me and take them away from everything they know. Don't you dare use our children as an excuse for your betrayal." He went silent. For the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. The police arrived within 20 minutes. Someone had called them during my speech. 2 officers walked through the crowd, parting the sea of angry parents like Moses parting the Red Sea. I watched them approach Annalise and my husband, reading them their rights, explaining their options. Annalise started crying, loud, ugly sobs that destroyed her carefully crafted image. She tried to explain, to blame me, to blame anyone but herself. The officers weren't interested. My husband was calm, too calm. He knew exactly what he was doing. He looked at me with dead eyes and said, "I'll get out of this. And when I do, I'll make sure you regret every word you said today." I met his gaze. "I already regret one thing," I said quietly. "I regret trusting you." They were both taken away in separate police cars. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Then someone started clapping, a single parent standing near the back, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire carnival was applauding. I stood on that stage, feeling the weight of months of pain and preparation finally lift from my shoulders. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt exhausted and relieved and free. The days that followed were a blur. The school board launched a full investigation. They found dozens more discrepancies I hadn't uncovered, extending back even further than my initial review. Annalise and my husband were formally charged with embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The district implemented new financial oversight protocols to prevent anything like this from happening again. Annalise lost her job, her reputation, and her marriage. Her husband, a quiet man I'd barely spoken to, filed for divorce immediately. He took their children and moved to another state. She was left with nothing. My husband was convicted and sentenced to several years in prison. His business collapsed. His friendships evaporated. His family, the ones he'd been so eager to leave behind, turned their backs on him. He had to sell everything to cover the legal fees and restitution. The life we'd built together was gone, but I was still here. I was still standing. I had my children, my home, my career. I'd proven to myself that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. I'd faced the worst betrayal a person can experience, and I'd come out the other side not broken, but transformed. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't love him either. I felt something closer to indifference. He was a chapter in my life that was finally closed. I didn't need revenge to feel complete. I just needed to move forward, and I did. I started a support group for women who'd been betrayed by their partners. I shared my story, offered advice, and created a community where people could heal. I went back to work full-time as a forensic accountant, but I also started consulting for schools and nonprofits, helping them implement fraud prevention measures. My children adjusted. It wasn't easy. There were tough conversations, difficult emotions, late-night tears, but they knew their mother loved them and would always protect them. They knew they could trust me. I bought a new house. Smaller, simpler, but full of light. I filled it with plants and books and art I love. I hosted dinner parties and game nights. I rebuilt my social circle. surrounding myself with people who supported me. One evening, about 2 years after everything happened, I was sitting on my new porch watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. A breeze rustled the trees. I heard laughter from inside, my kids playing with their friends. I felt a warmth spread through my chest. It wasn't happiness, not exactly. It was peace, a deep, settled contentment that came from knowing I'd faced the worst and survived. I'd told the truth. I'd protected my community. I'd stood up for what was right. And somewhere in a prison cell or a halfway house, the man who'd betrayed me was living with the consequences of his choices.
I didn't think about him often anymore. When I did, I felt nothing but a distant pity. He'd had everything and thrown it away. I'd lost everything and rebuilt it. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't about destroying someone else. It was about building yourself up. It was about choosing integrity over anger. It was about becoming the person you were always meant to be. And that was exactly what I'd done.